Jackson. Reed had always possessed what his mentors politely termed diplomatic curiosity, which was a generous way of saying he stared at fascinating things until someone told him to stop. This particular trait had served him well as a cultural liaison, helping him understand the intricate social dynamics of 17 different species. But it was about to land him in the kind of trouble that could reshape interstellar relations or end his career in spectacular fashion. Nexus. Prime Station hummed with the controlled energy of 43 different civilizations conducting business in the carefully maintained neutral zone between 5 major galactic powers. As a human cultural liaison assigned to facilitate interspecies understanding, Jackson had grown comfortable navigating the complex web of customs, taboos, and protocols that kept this delicate ecosystem functioning. He was reviewing cultural exchange proposals between the Centauri Collective and the Rigel Trade Federation when the station's atmosphere shifted with the suddenness of a solar flare. Conversations ceased mid-sentence. Footsteps halted on metal decking, and even the ambient lighting seemed to dim as if the station itself had drawn breath in anticipation. The massive central plaza began organizing itself with military precision as beings from dozens of species created a wide corridor through the heart of the space. Tall, elegant Altarians with their distinctive blue-tinted skin pressed themselves against bulkheads alongside chittering insectoid merchants and even the usually arrogant Proximan diplomats, all wearing expressions that ranged from deep reverence to barely controlled terror. "What's happening?" Jackson asked Tev Morganis, the Centauri representative he'd been working with. The normally composed alien's features showed something approaching panic. "The Shadow Empress," he whispered, his voice carrying the tone reserved for natural disasters and cosmic anomalies. Vexra Nightfall of the Valyrian Empire. Jackson's cultural training immediately cataloged what he knew about Valyrians, humanoid species, advanced dark matter technology, empire spanning 60 star systems, ruled by an absolute monarchy with a reputation for swift and decisive military action. What his briefings hadn't adequately conveyed was the visceral impact of actually encountering their sovereign. She entered the plaza like darkness given form and purpose. Empress Vixura stood tall enough to meet most humanoid species at eye level, her flowing obsidian cape seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her midnight black hair cascaded in waves that seemed to move with their own gravitational field, and her skin held the pale luminescence characteristic of Valyrian nobility. But it was her eyes that commanded absolute attention, violet as deep space nebulae and twice as mesmerizing, scanning the assembled crowd with the predatory awareness of someone who had never encountered a threat she couldn't neutralize. Her entourage followed at a respectful distance. Military officers whose decorated uniforms suggested they'd pacified more star systems than most species had ever discovered. Advisors whose expressions carried the careful neutrality of people who understood that disappointing their empress was a career-ending mistake, and enough armed guards to constitute a small invasion force. The crowd's reaction was immediate and total. Every being in the plaza either bowed deeply or averted their gaze, following protocols that apparently stretched back generations. Even the normally obstinate Proximan diplomats pressed their faces toward the deck, plating like children caught in mischief. Jackson, who had spent the last 4 years studying cultural diversity with the enthusiasm of someone who found beauty in the infinite variations of civilization throughout the galaxy, watched with open fascination. She moved through the space with fluid precision, each step deliberate and controlled, her violet gaze sweeping across the assembled beings like a scanner searching for threats or signs of disrespect. Silence was so complete that Jackson could hear the soft whisper of her cape against the deck plating and the subtle hum of what appeared to be energy fields built into her ornate armor. Her beauty was undeniable classical features that suggested both intelligence and determination, a bearing that spoke of absolute confidence. and an aura of power that made her seem larger than her physical dimensions suggested. But it was more than physical attractiveness that held Jackson's attention. It was the combination of grace and authority, the way she carried herself, like someone who had never encountered a problem she couldn't solve through application of will and superior strategy. As a cultural liaison, he found her fascinating. As a human male, he found her stunning. As someone with questionable awareness of diplomatic protocols, he continued staring with the frank appreciation of someone observing a particularly magnificent work of art. Their eyes met across the crowded plaza. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations that had already stopped somehow became more silent. The crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath, waiting for either execution or divine intervention. Vexara's violet gaze locked onto his with the precision of a targeting system, and for a moment that stretched like the space between galaxies, they simply looked at each other. Jackson saw intelligence burning in those remarkable eyes, along with surprise that suggested she wasn't accustomed to being observed so directly. She took 3 measured steps in his direction, her entourage trailing behind like satellites following a particularly dangerous star. The crowd parted before her with the efficiency of water flowing around an obstacle, leaving a clear path between the Empress of the Valyrian Empire and one apparently suicidal human diplomat. "You dare look at me?" she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that had commanded fleets and conquered worlds. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Jackson realized that everyone in the plaza was waiting for his response. Tev Morganis made a small sound that might have been a prayer, or possibly a farewell. Several other diplomats were already composing what appeared to be incident reports. Jackson smiled, the expression carrying all the natural warmth that had made him effective at interspecies relations, and was about to either revolutionize galactic diplomacy or get him vaporized by Imperial guards. "Only because you're beautiful," he said. The silence that followed could have been packaged and sold as a luxury product. Empress Vexara Nightfall, conqueror of star systems and terror of 3 galactic sectors, stood perfectly still for what felt like several geological epochs, her violet eyes wide with something that might have been shock. For the first time in living memory, the Shadow Empress appeared to be at a complete loss for words. Look that crossed Empress Vexara's face could only be described as the expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had just been gently but thoroughly rearranged. Her violet eyes widened, her perfect composure wavering like a deflector shield under unexpected bombardment. And for several heartbeats, she simply stared at Jackson as if he were a mathematical equation that had somehow achieved consciousness. "Beautiful," she repeated, the word emerging from her lips like she was testing an unfamiliar language. Jackson nodded, apparently committed to his course of action, despite the growing certainty that he'd just made the kind of diplomatic mistake that would require footnotes in history books. "Strikingly beautiful, actually. I hope that's not inappropriate to mention, but human cultural protocols generally encourage acknowledgement of aesthetic appreciation." The assembled crowd watched this exchange with the horrified fascination of beings witnessing either a historic moment or a spectacular execution. Tev Morganis had gone so pale that his blue skin appeared almost translucent, while several other diplomats were discreetly backing toward the nearest emergency exits. Vexara's military escort shifted restlessly, hands moving toward weapons with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who'd served their empress through dozens of campaigns. But she raised one hand in a gesture that froze them mid-motion, her attention entirely focused on the human who had somehow managed to surprise, someone who thought she'd encountered every possible form of interaction. "No one," she said slowly, "calls me beautiful." "Really?" Jackson asked with genuine curiosity, his diplomatic training kicking in despite the surreal circumstances. "That seems like an oversight. I mean, I understand that you're primarily known for military conquest and political authority, but surely someone has mentioned that you're also remarkably attractive. Empress, Vexra blinked a reaction so unexpectedly human that it sent whispers through the crowd like ripples across still water. They call me the Shadow Empress, the Void Bringer, the Nightmare of the Outer Rim. Those are impressive titles, Jackson agreed diplomatically. Very intimidating and politically useful, but they don't really address the aesthetic component of your presence, do they? Vexra stared at him with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing its parameters. Are you attempting to court me, human? Not exactly, Jackson said, though he felt heat rise in his cheeks. I'm attempting to answer your question honestly. You asked why I dared look at you, and the truth is that I found you visually striking enough to warrant observation. Among humans, that's generally considered a compliment rather than an act of defiance. Compliment, she repeated, testing the word like she was examining exotic technology. There, conversation was interrupted by the rapid approach of a military aide whose decorated uniform suggested he'd participated in enough conflicts to outfit a small museum. He saluted with crisp precision before speaking in the rapid, urgent tones reserved for crisis management. Your Imperial Majesty, the aide said, his voice carrying barely controlled panic. Priority communication from Admiral Cross. The hegemony has launched simultaneous attacks on 3 border worlds: Kepler Station, the Arcturus mining colony, and the civilian settlement on New Harmony. The transformation in Vexra was immediate and complete. The woman who had been struggling with the concept of compliments vanished, replaced by the military commander who had conquered 60 star systems. Her violet eyes hardened to the consistency of crystallized starfire, and her bearing shifted from curious to lethal with the efficiency of a weapon being armed. Casualties? She demanded. Unknown, Majesty. Communications are sporadic, but preliminary reports suggest coordinated strikes designed for maximum infrastructure damage. They attack while I'm engaged in diplomatic proceedings, Vexra said, her voice carrying the cold fury that had made her name synonymous with military retribution. They think to find us vulnerable. General Thorne, her chief military advisor, stepped forward with the confident bearing of someone who'd advised his empress through campaigns that redefined galactic warfare. His weathered face bore the scars of a dozen conflicts, and his steel-gray eyes held the calculating intelligence of a master strategist. Your Majesty, we should return immediately to coordinate the response. The Shadow Fleet stands ready for immediate deployment. Yes, Vexra said, but her gaze lingered on Jackson with something that might have been regret. The hegemony will learn the price of their aggression. Jackson found himself speaking before his diplomatic training could stop him. Your Majesty, if I may suggest, military retaliation might be exactly what they're hoping for. The entire Imperial entourage turned to stare at him with expressions ranging from shock to murderous intent. General Thorne's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, while several guards took a step forward, offering unsolicited strategic advice to the Shadow Empress. Was the kind of action that typically resulted in summary execution followed by intensive diplomatic negotiations to prevent interstellar incidents. Explain, Vexra said, her voice carrying the dangerous neutrality of someone deciding whether to be offended or intrigued. The timing suggests they want to provoke a massive military response, Jackson said, his cultural analysis training shifting into the analytical mode that had made him effective at understanding alien psychology. 3 simultaneous attacks while you're at a neutral station, in full view of diplomatic representatives from dozens of species. They're not just attacking your territory, they're challenging your reputation in front of witnesses. My reputation requires defense, Vexra said coldly. Absolutely, Jackson agreed. But there might be more effective ways to defend it than conventional military retaliation. Ways that would demonstrate not just your power, But your strategic brilliance. General Thorne's expression suggested he was witnessing heresy in real time. Human, you presume to advise the Empress on military strategy? I presume to offer perspective, Jackson corrected carefully. Sometimes an outside viewpoint can reveal solutions that aren't immediately apparent to those directly involved in the situation. Before anyone could respond, another figure approached from the crowd, a woman with the distinctive bearing of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. Kira Salas had been Jackson's colleague for 2 years, and her arrival meant that the human diplomatic corps was taking this situation very seriously indeed. That Kira was everything Jackson wasn't in terms of diplomatic protocol measured, cautious, and completely aware of the political implications of every word. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that matched her no-nonsense expression, and her gray eyes held the sharp intelligence that had made her one of the most effective negotiation specialists in the diplomatic service. Your Imperial Majesty, Kira said, executing a perfect formal bow that acknowledged Vexura's rank without suggesting subservience. I am Kira Salas, Senior Negotiation Specialist with the Terran Diplomatic Corps. I apologize for my colleagues. Unconventional approach to protocol. Vexura studied Kira with the same intensity she'd previously reserved for tactical displays during fleet engagements. And you are here to restrain his diplomatic curiosity? I'm here to offer the full support of the Terran diplomatic mission, Kira said smoothly. My colleague's observations, while unorthodox in presentation, may have strategic merit worth considering. General Thorne looked like he'd just witnessed his Empress announce her intention to negotiate with antimatter, but he maintained his military discipline. Your Majesty, with respect, we have established protocols for responding to hegemony aggression. Protocols that have served the Empire well. Protocols they're counting on. Jackson interjected, then caught Kira's warning glance. I mean, if you're interested in hearing alternative approaches. Vexura studied him with an expression that was becoming increasingly difficult to read. The anger was still there, but it was now mixed with something that might have been curiosity, or perhaps the intellectual challenge of a puzzle she hadn't encountered before. What kind of alternative approaches? She asked finally. The kind that would make your enemies fear your intelligence even more than they fear your fleets, Jackson said. If you're interested in hearing them. The silence stretched between them like the gravitational field around a neutron star, warping everything in its vicinity. Tev Morganis appeared to be contemplating whether it was too late to request a transfer to a safer assignment, like perhaps cataloging radiation signatures inside active supernovas. Kira stepped forward with the smooth professionalism that had made her career. Your Majesty, if I may, the Terran Diplomatic Corps has extensive experience with unconventional conflict resolution. We would be honored to provide consultation on strategic alternatives. General Thorne's weathered features showed grudging respect for Kira's diplomatic approach, even as his strategic mind clearly disagreed with the entire premise. Your Majesty, while alternative perspectives may have theoretical value, we have immediate military concerns that require decisive action. Vexura looked between Jackson and Kira, her violet eyes calculating probabilities and possibilities with the precision of a quantum computer. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been curiosity mixed with imperial command. Very well. You may both accompany us aboard the Voidbreaker. I find myself interested in these alternative approaches. General Thorne looked like he'd just witnessed his Empress announce her intention to recruit civilians for active military duty, but he nodded with the discipline of someone who'd learned that questioning imperial decisions was significantly more dangerous than following them. However, Vexura continued, her violet gaze fixing on both humans with laser precision, if your alternatives prove less effective than conventional military response, you will discover that being called beautiful was the least consequential thing that happened today. Understood, Your Majesty, Kira said with diplomatic precision, while Jackson simply nodded, wondering if his diplomatic insurance covered incidents involving conquest-minded alien empresses and questionable strategic advice. As they prepared to leave Nexus Prime Station, Jackson realized that his simple compliment had somehow evolved into a military advisory position aboard the most feared warship in the galaxy. It was, he reflected, exactly the kind of situation his mentors had warned him about when they'd mentioned his diplomatic curiosity. But as he caught one more glimpse of Vexra's remarkable violet eyes, he found himself thinking that some risks were worth taking, especially when they involved getting to know the woman behind the terrifying reputation. The Voidbreaker was exactly what Jackson expected from a flagship designed to project imperial power across multiple star systems, massive, intimidating, and equipped with enough firepower to rearrange the geography of small moons. What he hadn't expected was how efficiently the ship's command center operated, with officers coordinating fleet movements and intelligence analysis with the precision of a symphony orchestra performed by people who understood that hitting the wrong note could result in catastrophic military failure. Empress Vexra stood at the central tactical display like a conductor directing movements of cosmic significance, her midnight hair flowing as she gestured toward holographic representations of the attacked worlds. The violet glow of her eyes reflected in the display panels, creating an effect that was both mesmerizing and slightly terrifying. "Status report," she commanded, her voice carrying absolute authority through the bridge's communication systems. Admiral Cross's image materialized in the tactical display, his battle-scarred features showing the strain of coordinating defensive operations across 3 separate star systems. "Your Majesty, initial damage assessment indicates surgical strikes against communication hubs and transportation infrastructure. Casualties are lighter than expected, but strategic capabilities have been significantly degraded." Jackson studied the tactical information with the analytical skills that had made him effective at understanding complex alien social structures, while Kira maintained the professional composure that had earned her reputation as one of the diplomatic corps' most valuable assets. "Your Majesty," Jackson said carefully, "may I ask about the tactical objectives of these specific targets?" "General," Thorne's expression suggested he was still processing the fact that human civilians were asking strategic questions aboard an Imperial warship, but Vexra nodded for him to continue. "Communication hubs and transportation networks," Jackson said, highlighting the affected systems on the display. "They're not trying to inflict maximum casualties or capture territory. They're trying to isolate these worlds and force you into a predictable response pattern." "Which would be?" Vexra asked, her tactical mind already following his reasoning. "Massive military retaliation to restore communications and demonstrate imperial power," Jackson said. "Exactly the kind of overwhelming force projection that's made you famous throughout the galaxy." Before anyone could respond, the bridge doors opened to admit a figure who commanded immediate attention despite his youth. Prince Davin Nightfall possessed the same ethereal beauty as his sister, but where Vexra projected controlled danger, he radiated intellectual curiosity tempered by royal responsibility. His platinum hair caught the bridge lighting like spun starlight, and his violet eyes, a shade lighter than his sister's, held the sharp intelligence of someone who understood political complexity at a molecular level. "Sister," he said, his voice carrying the easy familiarity that came with royal sibling relationships, "I've been analyzing the attack patterns from the Palace Intelligence Center. Our human guests may have identified something significant." Vexra's expression softened almost imperceptibly at her brother's arrival, a change so subtle that only someone watching her closely would have noticed. Jackson noticed. "Explain," she said, though her tone held more warmth than it had for anyone else aboard the ship. "The hegemony strikes weren't random," Davin said, manipulating the tactical display with practiced ease. They targeted systems that would require specific types of Imperial response forces that would need to be pulled from our border defenses. With the Corvathian alliance, Kira stepped forward, her diplomatic training recognizing the importance of this intelligence. A diversionary tactic designed to weaken your position against a third party. Precisely, Davin agreed, his violet eyes meeting hers with obvious appreciation for her quick understanding. The hegemony and the alliance have been conducting secret negotiations for months. Our intelligence suggests they're planning coordinated action against Imperial expansion. General Thorne's weathered features darkened as the implications became clear. A two-front war. They're forcing us to commit our forces to defensive actions, while they prepare for simultaneous offensives. Vexera studied the tactical display with the intensity she reserved for the most complex strategic challenges, which means conventional military retaliation would accomplish exactly what they want. Imperial forces scattered across multiple defensive positions, unable to respond effectively to coordinated assault. But if we don't respond, the general argued, we appear weak. That invites further aggression, not if we respond in ways they don't expect, Jackson said, his cultural analysis training providing unexpected insight. What if instead of attacking their forces, you simply made their strategy irrelevant? The bridge fell silent as every officer turned to stare at the human, who had just suggested making enemy military forces irrelevant. Admiral Cross's image flickered as he processed this unconventional approach. Your Majesty, the Admiral said carefully, with respect, how does one make enemy military strategy irrelevant? Vexera smiled an expression that transformed her entire face from imperial authority to breathtaking beauty, and Jackson realized he was witnessing something rare. By changing the fundamental parameters of the conflict, she said. By demonstrating that the Shadow Empress can accomplish in hours what they expected would require months of military campaign. Psychological warfare, Kira added, understanding dawning in her gray eyes. Instead of responding with predictable force, you respond with unpredictable brilliance. Prince Davin moved to stand beside his sister, and for a moment, Jackson saw not the feared rulers of a galactic empire, but siblings who had learned to trust each other's judgment in situations where failure meant the destruction of everything they protected. The diplomatic implications could be significant, Davin said thoughtfully. If we can resolve this crisis without massive military engagement, it demonstrates imperial strength through restraint rather than imperial strength through destruction. More importantly, Vexera said, her violet gaze finding Jackson's across the bridge, it demonstrates that the Shadow Empress is not limited to conventional responses, that she can adapt, innovate, and surprise even her enemies. General Thorne looked like he was watching his carefully structured military worldview being gently dismantled by civilian logic, but his strategic mind was beginning to see the possibilities. Your Majesty, if this approach fails, the political consequences could be severe. And if conventional military response succeeds exactly as our enemies expect, the strategic consequences will be catastrophic, Vexera replied. General, prepare contingency plans for immediate fleet deployment, but hold all offensive operations until further orders. As the bridge crew began implementing her commands, Vexera approached Jackson and Kira with the fluid grace that made every movement seem choreographed. Up close, her ethereal beauty was even more, striking the pale luminescence of her skin, the way her midnight hair seemed to move with its own gravitational field, the intelligence that burned in her remarkable violet eyes. Your alternative approaches, she said quietly, her voice pitched for their ears alone. I find myself curious about the specific details. Jackson felt his pulse quicken as he realized she was asking him to outline strategy that could affect millions of lives across dozens of star systems. Your Majesty, the key is understanding what they actually want versus what they think they want. They want to weaken the Empire, but they think they want to provoke you into overreaction. So we give them what they actually want without giving. them what they think they want, Kira added, her diplomatic mind following the logic. We demonstrate imperial strength through means they haven't anticipated. Vexura studied them both with an intensity that made Jackson acutely aware of how close she was standing. And you believe this will be more effective than overwhelming military response? I believe it will be more unpredictable than overwhelming military response, Jackson corrected. And in politics, unpredictability can be more valuable than raw power. For several heartbeats, Vexura simply looked at him, her violet eyes seeming to peer directly into his thoughts. When she spoke, her voice carried a note of something that might have been vulnerability. Do you understand what you're asking me to risk? My reputation, my empire's security, the lives of millions of my people? Jackson met her gaze without flinching. I understand what you're already risking by following predictable patterns that your enemies can anticipate and counter. Sometimes the greatest risk is refusing to take any risks at all. The silence stretched between them like the space between stars, pregnant with possibilities and consequences that could reshape the balance of galactic power. Finally, Vexura spoke, her voice carrying the authority that had commanded fleets and conquered worlds, but also something softer, something that might have been trust. Very well, she said. Show me these alternative approaches. Show me how to surprise enemies who think they know exactly what the Shadow Empress will do. As Prince Davin began, coordinating with the Intelligence Division, and General Thorne reluctantly prepared non-conventional strategic options, Jackson realized that his simple compliment had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined. He was no longer just a cultural liaison who had noticed a beautiful woman. He was helping to reshape imperial strategy in ways that could affect the fate of entire civilizations. But as he watched Vexura work, seeing the brilliant tactical mind behind the fearsome reputation, seeing the woman who carried the weight of an empire's survival on her shoulders with grace and determination, he found himself thinking that some responsibilities were worth accepting, especially when they meant standing beside someone remarkable enough to change the galaxy itself. The real question was whether the galaxy was ready for what the Shadow Empress might become when she stopped being predictable.